I've been unhappy for years, Daniel began, smiling faintly as he stood before our gathered friends and family. I want a divorce. The clinking of his champagne glass still echoed in the air as his words landed like a grenade in the middle of our 25th anniversary celebration. Our adult children, Thomas and Jennifer, stared with their mouths agape. Friends froze mid-sip, eyes darting between us. The restaurant's private dining room, which I'd decorated with silver anniversary decorations and photographs spanning our decades together, suddenly felt airless. I simply nodded and replied, I understand completely. Something flickered across Daniel's face, surprise, perhaps disappointment at my composure. He'd expected tears, begging, or public humiliation. Instead, I turned to each stunned guest and thanked them warmly for coming to what had become our final celebration as a couple. My name is Marlene Griffin. I'm 57 years old, and after spending a quarter-century devoted to my marriage, raising our children, managing our household in Richmond, Virginia, and supporting Daniel through 3 career changes, 2 financial disasters, and 1 major health scare, I found myself standing in an elegant restaurant watching my husband try to blindside me with our divorce. As the party awkwardly dispersed, guests murmuring sympathies and shooting daggers at Daniel, I approached him with the calm of someone who had made peace with a hurricane long before it hit shore. You'll want to call them first thing in the morning, I said, slipping a single business card into his hand. His eyes widened as he read the name on the embossed card. Rebecca Stone, Esquire, one of the most feared divorce attorneys in Virginia. Why would you have this? He asked, his voice suddenly less certain. I simply smiled, patted his arm, and walked away to hug our bewildered children. Over their shoulders, I watched Daniel's confident expression crumble as the first inkling that something was wrong pierced his self-assurance. What he didn't know, what I'd made absolutely certain he didn't know, was that 6 months earlier, while looking for our property tax statement in his desk drawer, I had discovered a lease agreement for an apartment in Shockoe Bottom, our city's trendy downtown district. 2 days later, I glimpsed a series of disturbingly intimate texts between him and someone labeled only as co-worker when his phone lit up during dinner. And that was just the beginning of what I knew. By the time Daniel dropped his divorce bombshell at our anniversary party, I had spent half a year methodically documenting every aspect of his betrayal. He thought he was ending our marriage on his terms, but I had been preparing my exit strategy with military precision since Valentine's Day. Growing up, my grandmother always told me, trust, but verify. It was advice I had largely ignored throughout my marriage. I believed in Daniel completely. We met when I was 30, and he was 32. Both of us working at Falwyn Security, me in human resources, him as a rising star in sales. Our courtship was a whirlwind, and within a year, we were married with a prenuptial agreement that protected both of us if things ever went south. 2 beautiful children followed, and I eventually stepped back from my career to manage our growing family while Daniel's sales career soared. He moved from Falwyn to Brightvale Mining, and then to Everken Motors, climbing the corporate ladder with each jump. I supported every decision, every late night, every weekend business trip, even as our children grew up and needed their father at soccer games and dance recitals that he inevitably missed. Your dad is working hard for all of us, I would tell them, believing it myself. And he did provide well. Our colonial home in the West End neighborhood, private schools for the kids, and comfortable family vacations twice a year. But looking back, I can see the signs I missed. The gradual emotional distance, the growing criticism of my appearance compared to the dynamic professionals he worked with, the diminishing physical intimacy explained away by stress and aging. Marriage changes after 20 years, my friends would assure me. It's normal to become more like roommates. What wasn't normal were the growing number of business dinners that left his collar smelling of perfume I didn't wear, or the second cell phone I discovered in his briefcase when packing it for a hospital stay after his gallbladder surgery 3 years ago. A phone he claimed was just for international clients, and that mysteriously disappeared after his recovery. I convinced myself these were misunderstandings. The alternative was too painful to consider. Until Valentine's Day this year. Daniel had forgotten the holiday entirely. Not unusual in recent years, but claimed a last-minute client emergency when I mentioned our dinner reservation. I spent the evening alone, flipping through old photo albums and wondering how we had drifted so far from the couple in those faded pictures. The next morning, I decided to file our tax paperwork early and needed our property records. That's when I found it, tucked between home insurance documents and car titles, a lease agreement for an apartment on East Carey Street, signed 2 months earlier. Daniel's signature, clear as day, on a one-bedroom unit that cost nearly a third of his monthly take-home pay. That discovery would change everything about how I approached our 25th year of marriage. I sat in my car outside the apartment building for 3 hours that day, paralyzed between confronting him immediately and pretending I never saw the lease. The elegant brick building with its rooftop deck and floor-to-ceiling windows mocked everything I thought I knew about our financial situation. "We need to be more careful with spending this year," Daniel had told me just weeks before I found the lease. "The market's unstable." Yet he had somehow found money for a $20,800 monthly rental in the city's most desirable neighborhood, money that was supposedly too tight for the kitchen renovation I'd been requesting for 5 years. When I finally drove home, I made 2 decisions that would alter the trajectory of my life. First, I would not confront Daniel until I understood exactly what I was facing. Second, I would protect myself by gathering every shred of evidence possible before making any moves. The next morning, while Daniel was at the gym, I examined his phone. He thought himself clever using a fingerprint lock, but I had long ago noticed he used his right thumb to unlock it. While he slept, I had carefully pressed his thumb to the sensor, checking messages that confirmed my worst fears. He and his coworker, Jessica Palmer, had been involved for at least 18 months. Their texts were explicit, filled with references to our place and plans for a future together once he handled things at home. Reading their exchanges, I learned Jessica was 34, recently divorced herself, and worked in marketing at Everken Motors. She had apparently convinced Daniel that their May-December relationship was his ticket to renewed youth and excitement. My hands shook as I photographed key conversations with my own phone, making sure to capture timestamps and contact information. The physical pain of betrayal was overwhelming, a vice grip around my chest that made breathing difficult. 25 years of memories, twisted by the knowledge that our recent history had been built on lies. That evening, as Daniel kissed my cheek absently before diving into work emails, I struggled to maintain my composure. The urge to scream, to demand answers, to throw his deception in his face was nearly overwhelming. Instead, I smiled and brought him his favorite evening bourbon. "Working late again?" I asked casually. "Quarterly reports are coming up," he replied without looking up. "Don't wait up." I nodded, retreating to our bedroom, where I allowed myself 10 minutes of silent tears before calling my oldest friend, Valerie. "I need the name of the best divorce attorney in Richmond," I said when she answered, "and I need absolute discretion." 2 days later, I sat across from Rebecca Stone in her downtown office, laying out what little evidence I had gathered so far. The distinguished attorney with her silver-streaked bob and penetrating gaze listened without interruption before saying words that would become my mantra over the coming months. "We won't just build a case, Marlene. We'll build an ironclad fortress. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're up against." Rebecca's advice was clear. Become an intelligence operative in my own marriage. Document everything, follow the money. Build a complete picture of our marital assets and Daniel's activities before giving him any indication I knew about his betrayal. "The element of surprise is your greatest advantage," she counseled. "The moment he knows you're aware, he'll start hiding assets and constructing his own narrative." So began my double life. On the surface, I remained the supportive wife of 25 years, managing our home, attending company functions on Daniel's arm, and planning our upcoming anniversary celebration. Beneath that facade, I transformed into a methodical investigator, documenting every aspect of our financial and personal lives. I started with our finances. Daniel had always handled the investments while I managed the household accounts. Now I needed to understand the full scope of our portfolio. I told him I wanted to learn more about investing for my own knowledge, a request he dismissed with patronizing amusement, but ultimately granted by sharing our financial advisor's contact information. "Just don't make any changes without consulting me first," he cautioned. "These things are complicated." Our financial advisor, Harold Wilson, was initially reluctant to discuss details with me until I gently reminded him that as Daniel's spouse, I had legal right to information about our joint assets. Once convinced, Harold became surprisingly forthcoming, particularly after I mentioned concerns about unusual money movements. "Well, there have been some significant withdrawals over the past year and a half," Harold admitted. "I assumed Daniel discussed these with you." He hadn't. The withdrawals totaled nearly $320,000, money apparently transferred from our joint investment accounts to a separate entity I'd never heard of, Griffin Consulting LLC. "Daniel established it as a side business venture," Harold explained, "for consulting work separate from his main employment. A business I knew nothing about. A shell company, as Rebecca later explained, likely created to funnel marital assets away from our shared portfolio." I photographed every document Harold shared, noting dates, amounts, and account numbers. My next step was accessing our home computer. Daniel wasn't particularly tech-savvy and used the same passwords for most accounts, variations of our children's birthdays combined with our anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on me as I used Jenny052Tom719 to access his email account. What I found confirmed my suspicions and revealed new betrayals. Email exchanges with a realtor about purchasing a condominium in Charlotte, North Carolina. An offer letter from Halestra Audio, a company based in Charlotte, dated 3 months earlier. Flight confirmations for weekend trips he'd claimed were golf outings with clients, and dozens of emails to Jessica discussing their future plans. "Once the anniversary party is behind us, I'll handle the divorce quickly," he wrote in one message. "Marlene will be devastated, but she'll get over it. The timing works perfectly with the Charlotte move." They had it all planned. He would announce our divorce at the anniversary party, positioning himself as the honest husband who had simply fallen out of love, but had respectfully waited for our milestone anniversary before moving on. Then he would relocate to Charlotte with Jessica, taking his new position at Halestra and living in the condominium they had already selected together. I sat at our desk, reading their calculated plans for dismantling my life, and felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just an affair or midlife crisis. This was a comprehensive campaign to discard me with minimal financial consequence to himself after I had devoted my entire adult life to supporting his success. That night, I made a silent promise. Daniel Griffin would not know what hit him. With Rebecca's guidance, I expanded my investigation. I needed to understand not just what Daniel was planning, but what legal vulnerabilities existed in his strategy. Our prenuptial agreement had been straightforward. In the event of divorce, each party would retain assets brought into the marriage, while assets accumulated during the marriage would be divided equally. However, there was a critical infidelity clause that Rebecca immediately highlighted. If either party engages in extramarital affairs, they forfeit their right to certain protections, she explained. Most importantly, the injured spouse is entitled to a significantly larger percentage of marital assets acquired during the years of infidelity. The key would be proving when the affair began. If I could establish that Daniel's relationship with Jessica had extended over years, rather than months, I could potentially claim rights to much more than half our marital property, including portions of his retirement accounts and stock options. I hired a private investigator, William Jacobs, who specialized in infidelity cases. His services weren't cheap, but I pulled from my personal savings account, money I'd squirreled away from my occasional freelance HR consulting work that Daniel knew nothing about. William confirmed that Daniel and Jessica's relationship traced back at least 2 years. He provided photographs of them dining together, entering and leaving the apartment, and traveling to Charlotte on weekends when Daniel had claimed to be on golf trips. But the most damning evidence came from interviews William conducted with staff at Everken Motors. According to 3 separate sources within the company, their relationship was common knowledge as early as spring of 2023, William reported. One former executive assistant kept a detailed work diary that references them spending time alone in his office with the door locked on multiple occasions. The assistant had been dismissed shortly after, allegedly for performance issues. William located her, and she was more than happy to share her records and testify if needed, still bitter about her unceremonious termination that she believed was orchestrated to keep her silent. Armed with this information, Rebecca added workplace harassment implications to our strategy. If necessary, we can suggest that Everken Motors could face legal exposure for allowing a senior executive to engage in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, she explained. It's leverage we may not need to use, but it's valuable to have. As the weeks passed, I continued gathering evidence while maintaining a perfect facade of ignorance. I suggested the anniversary party, knowing it aligned with what Daniel had told Jessica. I spoke enthusiastically about the next 25 years, when around friends and family. I even initiated physical intimacy occasionally, something that clearly made Daniel uncomfortable, but that he couldn't reject without raising suspicions. Each time he invented a work excuse to visit the apartment or Charlotte, I simply smiled and told him I understood. Each time he complained about finances while secretly funding his double life, I nodded sympathetically. All the while, my case file grew thicker. 3 weeks before our anniversary, I made a crucial discovery. While backing up family photos to our cloud storage, I found a folder Daniel had apparently created by mistake in our shared account. It contained explicit photographs of him and Jessica together in the apartment, images dated consistently over the past 2 years. I immediately forwarded them to Rebecca and William, who confirmed they provided clear visual proof of the timeline of infidelity. The final piece clicked into place. "We're ready," Rebecca told me during our last meeting before the anniversary party. "The moment he makes his move, we'll respond with overwhelming force. He won't know what hit him." I left her office feeling strangely calm. After months of investigation, documentation, and strategic planning, there was nothing left to do but wait for Daniel to spring his trap, unaware that he was walking straight into mine. The anniversary party was my masterpiece of deception. I selected the Jefferson Hotel's grand ballroom, arranged for a string quartet, and designed a sophisticated evening celebrating a lifetime of partnership. The invitations, ivory cardstock with silver embossing, went to 60 of our closest friends and family members. I watched Daniel's face as I showed him the final guest list. "This seems excessive," he remarked, clearly discomforted by the scale of a celebration he knew would end in devastation. 25 years deserve something special," I replied innocently. "Don't worry about the cost. I've been saving for this." The evening arrived, and I wore a silver gown that had taken 3 fittings to perfect. Daniel seemed increasingly agitated as guests arrived, each congratulating us on reaching such a significant milestone. Our children had flown in, Thomas from Seattle, Jennifer from Boston, and both gave touching toasts about growing up watching their parents' loving partnership. "You've shown us what commitment really means," Jennifer said, raising her glass while Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. Throughout dinner, I noticed Daniel checking his watch, his face growing more resolved with each passing hour. I knew he was following the timeline he'd discussed with Jessica: make the announcement after dinner but before dessert, allowing for a dignified exit while guests were still present to support Marlene. When he finally stood and clinked his glass, a hush fell over the room. I watched his practiced smile, the rehearsed casualness in his posture, and thought about how many times he must have envisioned this moment, his declaration of independence, his new beginning at my expense. "I have something important to say," he began, his voice steady. "After much reflection, I want to be honest with everyone here tonight." He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "I've been unhappy for years," he said, the practiced line falling flat in the elegant ballroom. I want a divorce. The collective gasp was audible. Jennifer dropped her champagne glass, shattering it on the hardwood floor. Thomas half rose from his chair, confusion and anger battling on his face. Our friends stared in disbelief. But I was ready. I had rehearsed this moment just as carefully as Daniel had. I simply nodded and replied, "I understand completely." The confusion on his face was worth every moment of the past 6 months' deception. He had expected tears, pleading, perhaps even a scene. Instead, he got calm acceptance that clearly disrupted his narrative of being the reasonable party bringing an overdue end to an unhappy marriage. "I think we should thank everyone for coming," I continued smoothly, standing to address our shocked guests. "This has been a wonderful celebration of the past, even as we move toward different futures." One by one, I hugged each departing guest, accepting their whispered condolences and confused support with gracious smiles. Daniel stood awkwardly by the gift table, looking increasingly uncertain as his dramatic moment fizzled into uncomfortable social navigation. When the last guest had gone, save for our children who waited tearfully by the door, I approached Daniel with practiced composure. "You'll want to call them first thing in the morning," I said, slipping Rebecca's business card into his hand. He stared at the card, recognition dawning slowly. "Rebecca Stone? The divorce attorney?" "Yes," I confirmed. "She's quite selective about her clients, but she made an exception for me. 6 months ago." The blood drained from his face as comprehension set in. 6 months? "Don't worry about coming home tonight," I continued pleasantly. "I had the locks changed this afternoon. Your essentials are packed in a suitcase at the coat check. I believe you have somewhere else to stay, don't you?" As he stood frozen in shock, I turned to our children, linking my arms through theirs. "Let's go have that cake at home. I think we've had enough celebration for one evening." Daniel's lawyer called at 7:13 a.m. the following morning. I was already awake, having slept better than I had in months. "This is Philip Dawson representing Daniel Griffin," the voice announced stiffly. "I understand there's a situation we need to discuss." "Please direct all communication to Rebecca Stone," I replied, following the script Rebecca and I had prepared. "She's expecting your call." By 9 a.m., Rebecca called to report that Daniel was attempting damage control by offering a quick, generous settlement, a clear indication he hadn't yet grasped the extent of my preparation. "He's offering a 60-40 split of current visible assets in your favor, plus the house," she said. "Should I tell him we're just getting started?" "Absolutely." At 11 a.m., the formal divorce papers were served to Daniel at the Everkin Motors headquarters by a process server who, at my request, delivered them during a board meeting Daniel was leading. The thick document detailed not only my terms, 85% of marital assets, the house, and significant alimony, but included comprehensive evidence of his infidelity, financial deception, and plans to leave the state. By noon, 3 things happened in rapid succession. Daniel's lawyer requested an emergency meeting, Everkin's human resources director called Daniel to their offices, and Jessica Palmer cleaned out her desk and left the building in tears. When Rebecca met with Daniel and his lawyer that afternoon, she brought the final bombshell, William's full investigative report, complete with witness statements from former Everkin employees about the inappropriate workplace relationship. "My client is prepared to contact Everkin's board directly regarding the company's failure to address this situation if we cannot reach a satisfactory agreement," Rebecca informed them. "Additionally, we have documentation of the Griffin Consulting LLC shell company used to divert marital assets, which raises questions of tax impropriety that authorities might find interesting." Daniel's attempt to seize control of our divorce narrative had completely collapsed in less than 24 hours. His lawyer requested a brief recess, during which I imagine he delivered some very unwelcome news to my husband of 25 years. The settlement negotiations were remarkably brief. Daniel, facing potential professional disgrace, tax investigations, and the complete destruction of the narrative he'd constructed about our marriage, accepted terms that went far beyond what even Rebecca had initially thought possible. I received 85% of our marital assets, including full ownership of our home, his retirement accounts, and investment portfolios. Daniel retained only his personal possessions, his car, and a single investment account worth approximately 1/5 of our total net worth. The alimony payments would continue for 10 years, ensuring my financial security well into retirement age. Most satisfying was the non-disclosure agreement. Daniel would never publicly discuss the circumstances of our divorce, effectively preventing him from spinning a sympathetic narrative about our separation. In exchange, I agreed not to contact Everkin's board directly about his relationship with Jessica, though I made no promises about what information might find its way to them through other channels. 2 days after our anniversary party, Jennifer and Thomas came for dinner. They were still reeling from the public dissolution of their parents' marriage, but had begun to understand the situation after I shared selected details of Daniel's betrayal. "How did you stay so calm through all of this?" Jennifer asked, pouring another glass of wine. "I would have burned his clothes on the front lawn or something." "Strategic patience," I explained. "Your father never appreciated my intelligence. He saw me as the supportive wife, nothing more. That blind spot gave me the advantage." Thomas shook his head in amazement. "Remind me never to cross you, Mom." I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. I didn't want revenge initially. I just wanted fairness. But when I saw how comprehensively he had planned to discard me, I decided he needed to understand exactly whom he was dealing with. 1 month after the anniversary party, Daniel relocated to Charlotte as planned, alone, significantly poorer, and professionally diminished. Jessica, it turned out, had lost interest once his financial prospects dramatically changed. The condominium they had selected together was now beyond his means, and Halestra Audio had rescinded their offer upon learning of the circumstances of his departure from Everkin. I, meanwhile, began the next chapter of my life on my own terms, with resources, dignity, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that when tested, I had risen to the challenge with intelligence and strength I hadn't known I possessed. As I settled into my reclaimed life, I reflected on the irony that in trying to discard me, Daniel had inadvertently freed me to become more fully myself than I had been in 25 years of marriage.